Welcome, everyone. Glad to be back. Still studying Esther. Today we're going to start in Esther chapter 3. And we're going to meet up with the villain of this story, whose name is Haman. So this is verse 1. After these events, meaning Queen Esther being brought in as queen and Vashti being sent away and all the rest. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than those of all the other nobles. Remember, we said that because he's an Agagite, that means he was originally from Canaan, and they were arch enemies of the Jews always. Verse 2. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. We don't know why Mordecai wouldn't kneel down or pay him honor. The kneeling down I get, because as a Jew, he would not have wanted to kneel down to anyone, because his laws would have informed him, have no other gods before me, don't worship anybody but me. So as worshiper of the one true God, he would not have wanted to kneel down to Haman, who was actually elevating himself as a god. But paying him honor, that I think has to do with the fact that he was a Canaanite, because the respect of his position, Mordecai was just unwilling to do that because he was a part of a tribe that had always been an enemy of the Jews. The Bible definitely teaches us not to worship any gods, not to bow down to, in a way, other gods. But it also teaches us that we need to pay honor and respect to our government officials because God has put them in a place to help us and protect us. So the fact that Mordecai would not bow down to Haman, I think, is true to his religious principles, his love of God and not wanting to pay homage to another god. The fact that he wouldn't honor him comes more from the difference between the Israelites and the Canaanites and the fact that this was a hated enemy. But whatever the reasons Mordecai had, whether they were all spiritual or whether some of them were maybe from his own humanness, he would not bow down or worship him. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down. Now, how did he find out? Let's go back to verse 3. Now, the royal officials were at the gate. Remember, we always see Mordecai at the gate. So he either has a position there or he's waiting there all the time. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore, they told Haman about it, to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them that he was a Jew. So while they were questioning him, he revealed that he was a Jew. So these palace guards at the gate are going to go to Haman and tell him. This is verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. I really think Haman's pride and his cultural background played into this total feeling of anger and rage that Mordecai would not bow down to him. He was insulted by that. His pride was hurt. His background was being, thrown away as not important, and his position was not being honored. I realize Mordecai is not a believer, so we can't expect him to act like a child of God. But as children of God, we also have to struggle sometimes with this pride, with a pride issue. That pride gets in our way, and we make some pretty foolish, rash decisions when our pride gets hurt. Very often in my life, I found that I don't always admit that it's pride that's behind some of the problems. It's a hard thing to admit even to yourself and to admit to God that you have pride issue. But the Bible is very clear about pride. In Proverbs, it talks about pride and says, Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. When we get all involved in our own hurt feelings and we're asking, what about me? I shouldn't be hurt. How did that person, offend me? Or maybe we weren't invited somewhere and, we're hurt, or whatever the reasons that our pride gets involved. Maybe someone makes a comment that just doesn't sit right with us. We have to be vigilant about knowing that when our pride wells up, if we don't address it, we're heading for a fall. Because that's what the Bible is very clear about. Humility is a huge issue with God. He wants us to be dependent upon Him, not upon ourselves. He wants it to be about His glory, not our glory. So it's very important that we recognize that, and that we don't get involved in our pride. And what do we do when we get, what do we do with our pride? What do we do with it when we're feeling it? I think the biggest thing for me is just to go to God in prayer, admit that I'm feeling that way, and be honest and let it all hang out, and then submit myself to God's will. At that point, ask God to help me line up my feelings with His feelings. And the book of James is very clear about this. In verse 6, it said, He gives us more grace. That's why Scripture says God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. God will give us the grace to overcome our pride. And verse 7 says, submit yourself then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. I thought that was interesting. And as I read on later in that chapter, in verse 13, it talks about people who are boasting, and not just boasting about themselves, but about what they're going to do and their big plans. And this is so pertinent for our situation where we're social distancing right now. It says in verse 13, now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes, and all boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So here, the Bible is telling us, hey, you know what? You're making all these big plans, but guess what? God might have other plans. And I feel that that's so true in this time period now. We all had plans, and we all had plans that we had to cancel. And our plans are not God's plans. And God will bring good out of this evil. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that God sent this virus, because I don't believe God sends evil ever. I think He can bring good out of whatever evil happens. But I just think we go on our merry way thinking, oh, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go that, and I'm going to do there, and I'm going to travel, I'm going to go here. And all of a sudden, it only takes one thing, and all those plans can fall apart. But God doesn't fall apart. God is still there with us. So that's why we have to be humble in the sense that we can't assume we know it all and we can do it all by ourselves, because it just isn't. The things we think are not the same as what God thinks. And Isaiah tells us that. Chapter 45, verse 15 says, again, what we talked about yesterday, clearly you are a God who works behind the scenes. So God is working behind the scenes. And we don't always recognize that. We don't always realize. And later in Isaiah 15, this is what it says. For your thoughts are not my thoughts, says the Lord. Neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So we have no reason really to be proud. Our humility should come from knowing that God's plan is always better than our plan. And Haman has a big plan in mind in this story. And he is going to find out that his plan may not come to fruition the way he expects it to. So let's read on a little bit further in Esther and see the kind of plan that he has in mind. And the first thing he's going to do is he's going to try to set a date for this plan. So this is in verse 7. Remember, he doesn't just want to kill Haman, he wants to get all the Jews. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the Purim, that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and a month, and the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. That is the New International Version. And if I look in my big Bible, the New Living Translation is a little bit easier, I think, to understand, because it puts the calendar in modern terms instead of using the Jewish calendar. So this is the other translation of it. So in the month of April, during the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, lots were cast in Haman's presence, and the lots were called Purim, to determine the best day and month to take action. And the day selected was March 7th, nearly a year later. There are a couple of important things in here to remember. First is these Purim were lots or dice that were helping them to just by chance determine a date. They think it is all random. God doesn't deal in random. And they set a date that's a year hence. They're going to wait a whole year to fulfill this plan. And Haman thinks this is all his idea. What he doesn't realize, but what we can see, is that by setting up a date so far in advance with so much time in between, Haman is allowing God to work through Esther and find out about the plan and do something about the plan. If he had executed his plan within the next week or so, who knows what would have happened? But he didn't. And these lots, these random chance dice that they used to determine, were not random at all. They were God's way of giving Esther time to do something about this plot. So that's where we're going to leave the story, where Haman is set to have his plot to kill all the Jews. And we know that God has put Esther in the perfect place to be there when she finds out about the plan. So, Esther, of course, is the opposite of Haman. Esther has the humility of knowing that God is in control and that she even is humble in terms of Mordecai and some of the other advisors. Haman is working on pride. His pride was hurt. He's going to get revenge. And the story will be very interesting as it continues in the future. So I hope you'll join me. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.